After this session, at 11 a.m., we have a business builder session that will be presented by Catherine, who is on this session as well. And she is over our marketing here at Taxware. She has years of experience in marketing and worked with a large insurance agency and was their lead marketing manager for a long time, I think over 15 years. So we are grateful to have her. We're grateful to have her expertise and be able to share some of that with you in that business builder session. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and talk about the business forums. So in this session, I'm going to walk you through the basics of corp, partner, S corp, and fiduciary. I need to move this Zoom. I can't see here. Let's try moving there. Sorry about that. Because they're similar, I'm going to primarily use the partnership program. The main differences, of course, are that corp doesn't have allocation to a partner, shareholder, or beneficiary. Other than that, the four programs work and function very similar. They, of course, work very similar to our 1040 program as well. One note on fiduciary. Fiduciary doesn't actually have a Schedule K, an allocation to a Schedule K, like the partnership or an S corp. But to save a lot of time, we provide basically a dummy Schedule K. And we call that distribution. It's the distribution section. It works the same as like Schedule K in a partnership or S corp. And we found this is a really great feature and should save you a lot of time instead of having to key all that information on the individual beneficiary sections. There's a nice clean Schedule K type container, and then that can get allocated over to the beneficiaries based on percentage value, and then some final cleanup on the K1s. Overall, the flow is going to be similar to the 1040 program. The entity programs have the same mouse-free and button selections as the 1040 programs that I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. So let's dive into some of the tax law changes. There weren't too many tax law changes this year, but I'll just mention a few. On the 1120, the Schedule J added a line 9F for interest and tax due under section 456A, excuse me. Schedule K added a line 26 for the entity having a substantial ownership and lists that by either by value or by vote. The Schedule K 24 also added the line addition of 24A. And then on Form 8827, they've removed most of the minimum alt-min tax line items and removed page 2 entirely. And then finally, 1120 is our last entity that we are in the process of converting all of the states over, and that is about halfway finished. The 1120S, we were able to finish all of the states, and those are all in the native next-gen format. On to the 1120S, had the same changes on the 8827 as the 1120, with most of the changes coming on the, well, really the K1, but it reflects on our K. On the other income section, they deleted code F, section 965. It deleted the same item on the other deduction section. On foreign transactions, they changed code U, which used to be 965 to be section 951A information. And then they added quite a few codes to the other information section. And then one big change on the S corp in the print, we added the code designation to those other items if there's room on the K1. If there's not room, then we'll just print the total like we have in the past, and then the itemized listing will be on, in essence, our K1 worksheet, which was our page 2. 1065 had the most changes. it added the same overall ownership for foreign entities as the 1120 at the bottom of the question section. The partnership, I'd really refer you to their instructions, but they basically removed and added the same section 965 items as we already talked about on the 1120, but they added a ton of codes to the other information section. And I can show you those when we actually get to the print, but I just wanted to draw your attention to it to let you know that there were quite a few code additions to the 1065K1, which we worked backward through the K. So all those additions were on the K as well. And then we added the same code information designations on the 1065. If there's room, we'll go ahead and itemize those by code. And if there's not, we'll just print the total. But then this year, and I'll get into a little bit more detail, the IRS actually created a pretty cool worksheet in the K1 instructions. So we were able to extract that worksheet, and now we have a print option to actually include that worksheet if you want to, which has all of the codes broken down, which was one of TaxWorks' main reasons we added the page 2 the way we did. Is, I don't know about you, but I get a K1 and it has some abstract code. The first thing I got to do is open up the instructions and find out what this code is. After time, we begin to memorize some of the codes, but it's not always the easiest thing to do. So we provided the informational sheet with the instruction on where some of those items might carry onto the 1040 system. Well, now they have this worksheet, which provides that same information, but even in a more detailed process. Unfortunately, they, for whatever reason, did not provide the same worksheet on the S Corp. If they do, we'll probably go ahead and add it in the future. But right now, it is just available in the 1065. 1041 changes, pretty minimal. They added 2 lines on the Schedule G for qualified sick and paid family medical leave. On Schedule K1 in the final year deductions, they adjusted Code A to be Section 67E expenses, and then added Code B XX deductions. And with that, I think that's all the highlights as far as tax law changes. So we will go ahead and dive into the program. And like I said, I'm going to be using the 1065 program for the most part. So the screen's laid out pretty much the same as the 1040. We've tried to keep our pages, especially the start page, very concise on what takes place here, so it's more user-friendly. Obviously here it's pretty clear. We can start a new client, we can recall a client that's already active, or we have the prior year recall button. Again, like Mike talked about, for the most part, we are just going to be, I personally just use the recall client button, because in here we can start a new client and we can recall prior, and we can access clients that we've already accessed. We have the tracker similar to 1040, our letter formatter. You can print performas, your ERO setup, your defaults and settings, and miscellaneous features. And these 2 have been rearranged. And well, we'll dive into those right now. The prepare and ERO setup, again, with the new consolidated defaults and settings. Once you've set that information up on 1040 or whatever program, they all use the same databases now. So that's a really nice feature that we're looking forward to, especially as it migrates to get rid of some of the New Year wizards that have been necessary in the past that we're hoping just can kind of go away and just make it more user-friendly. Okay, so to talk a little bit about defaults and settings, most of it's kind of self-explanatory. I will mention a couple things. Just again, this has already been talked about, but if you're not using a network, your defaults are probably already set up. If you are using a network like Matt had talked in his session, you might need to make some adjustments on where your overall settings and data paths are. Other than that, there's really not a whole bunch to talk about in here. The current year data folder, I always like to think of that as where do I want my data to go. Your prior year data folder is obviously where did my data come from. Your depreciation program path, again, if you're using the defaults, you probably don't need to make an adjustment. But if you're using a network and you're using the depreciation program, the program needs to know where depreciation is if you're going to use assets management system versus just raw 4562 entry. The K1 import, this will happen automatically, but just to kind of talk about why we need to know where the 1040 program path is. This gets taken care of with our settings and data paths information automatically. But I just did want to mention that the K1 import, so our programs have the ability to basically create a little database entry of all of your partners and shareholders and beneficiaries, so that on the 1040 side, you can cleanly or quickly recall that information into the K1 input. So I just wanted to mention that the K1 import happens when you either e-file or print or preview the complete return. We use those two items as kind of our flag to tell the system that this return is basically finished, or we think it's finished, and to go ahead and make those K1 entries into that database so that they can be recalled on the 1040 side. I know the techs get a few questions every year. Hey, does this integrate with your 1040 system? And they say yes. And they're like, well, it's not doing it. And it's generally because you're looking at the 1040 before you've completed the work on the entity itself. So just be aware that those are the flags to make that K1 entry itself. Your client ID, obviously it's red. It's pretty important. We can't patch your system. We electronic filing, we need to know who you are. So make sure you put in your proper client ID. And I think, oh, the letter formatters, or the letters selection. Again, if you're using our default letter and our title page, there's nothing really to do on these options, option 10 and 11. But if you're using a custom letter that you've generated and you've saved it as a different file name, this is where you would select, okay, this is the letter that I want to use instead of the default letter. All right. Miscellaneous features, I just wanted to quickly point this out. It's kind of new to the entities. There were a few options last year, but we made it mirror the some of the features in the 1040 system, and that it has the same backup utility as the 1040 that Matt and Donovan had already talked about. And the beauty of this backup utility is once you've scheduled it, it's going to fire off the backups for all the programs. It's not just going to fire it off for the partnership. Which is what it kind of did in the past. When you use the backup utility within partnership, it would only go grab partnership data. Now the backup utility is going to run that schedule for all the cross platforms. So that's a great tool, and that's been added for. Also the reports. We've moved, there were a couple client listings in the old system, but they were kind of hard to find. So we've moved those to right here to this miscellaneous features. So you can print those two client reports and have the ability to renumber your client information. That's kind of a nice feature. If you have a specific scheme that you like your clients numbered, that's one usage of it. But what I use that for is every once in a while, I'll kind of want to go do some experimenting, and I'll copy one of my partnership files or whatever files as another file, and then I know that my original isn't being messed with. I can sit and play around with the new one from time to time. All right. Main menu, let me go ahead and I think I'm going to jump into the program here for a minute. Okay, let me recall a client. And again, this works like our 1040 system, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on recall, but you have the same search fields, you have the same filter capabilities as you do in the 1040. I'm going to go ahead and use Eastland Queries here. I just wanted to talk about a few of the features on this main page, because this main page is the heart of the entity programs. Off to the left, like the 1040, you can double click any of these forms and it'll take you directly to that form. But this is more of a reminder of, hey, these are the forms that I've used while I was preparing this return. It's just kind of a nice flag. Our middle section is our constant calculations, so you can kind of see how this return is coming together, the overall income, taxable income, balance sheet indications, those kinds of things. I think that's it. For the most part, we've laid out this page, especially the top section, to kind of follow the overall flow of, in this case, a 1065 return in the order that we feel would kind of make sense, but overall kind of following those initial pages. So basic information, let's talk about that. There aren't too many items to point out. I do want to point out a couple. Let's see, the beginning and ending dates. I mean, obviously we need to key in a valid EIN, basic information, business activity code, then your beginning and ending dates. The questions come up, why do I need to enter a beginning and ending date if I'm a calendar year? And we use that, well, first it'll fail electronic filing if we don't have a beginning and ending date. But it also uses some of that in some of the 7004 calculations to know on the extension, and some other things kind of use those dates. So yes, even though it's calendar year, we ask you to enter a beginning and ending date. Once you've entered your beginning and ending date, the system will automatically, as you recall the data from the prior year, it'll automatically advance those years by one. So it's kind of a one and done thing. Once you've entered it, you're golden and it'll take care of it for you. But we do need the beginning and ending date entered. Let's see. We still label this Tax Matters Partner, even though the IRS has changed it to Partnership Representative. I guess that's a little bit of old school thinking, but to me, I don't know, it just seems to make more sense to call it. If the IRS is going to contact somebody about taxes, that description kind of makes sense. I imagine we'll change that to match, but just know that that's what we're talking about, is your partnership representative into this section. We do have the ability to, if you don't know who that person is and you're keying in information and you've keyed it in from a K1, or you've keyed in your K1 information already, you can select from your partners which tax matter partner that might be. Who did I have? I don't want to mess that up. We're going to use Jonathan Teak again, and it'll autofill what it can. If the tax matters partner is an entity, you do need to fill in this below information, and it does get electronic filed in two different sections depending on what section you fill out. For electronic filing, they do like to have the officer telephone number, and they do like the officer email, but I don't believe either one will reject. I think it just sends an alert. I think that's about it there. Questions and additional information. We default, if this is a new client, to cash. Not a whole bunch to cover here, but I do like to touch on line 18. On the 1120, 1120S, we can pretty much give a good solid guess as to whether or not this is below or above the $250,000 threshold, identifying the need for Schedule L and M1, M2. With the 1065, we attempt to do that, but they ask some additional questions that made it so we can't answer that 100% of the time. So that is what this question is for. If you have a client that is below $250,000 and meets all the other criteria, you can check that box and it will designate that it will flag in the e-file record that there shouldn't or isn't necessary for a Schedule L and a M1, M2 entry or an M3 entry. Let's see. I did want to talk about percentages in general. Generally, our system, unless we specifically say enter it as a percentage, most of our percentages you enter in as a decimal value. So if you're keying in on K1 and a partner has whatever 25%, that would be entered as 0.25, not 25%. Then on print and different things, we multiply it by 100 to make it look pretty, but in general, we want you to enter our percentages as decimal values. Okay, let me see. Just making sure I'm not missing too many things on my notes here. Yeah. Gross income is pretty straightforward. There are a couple items on deductions. Let me see here. Okay, yeah, so income is pretty straightforward. So I want to jump in and just mention a couple things on the deductions. Actually, we're going to do that. We're going to do that in the program. One of those things it's interesting to present when you're not live. When we do the live seminar or in-person seminar, we're pretty much glued to the program, but now we're playing with PowerPoint and different things. So I just want to make sure I'm on track here. So in deductions, there are just a couple things. The depreciation is pretty straightforward. It kind of follows the same format as the 1040, except obviously we're bringing only back a few numbers and filling out the 4562. If you are using the Assets Manager, this is where you would access that in the entity programs. If you're doing just straight 4562, this is where you would access that. And again, you need to make sure that if you are using the Assets Management System, make sure the program knows where the Assets Management System is. We have a whole video on depreciation with PowerPoint up on our website, so I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on it. But this is the new next-gen depreciation program. You don't need to go into it if you're not making additions or deletions to assets. If there's really no changes in that particular client's depreciation, the program, the partnership program in this case, when you recall it from the prior year to the current year, it's going to run year-end update for you and do the 4562 calculations, and everything's going to be laid in. It's beautiful. We're really excited about this new enhanced integration. But if you do have asset changes or what have you, that's how you access it. You would make those asset changes. We take you, unlike the old system, we take you directly to that client's information if we have a client depreciation file ID. So there's a lot of streamlining that has taken place in the new depreciation. highly encourage you to watch the video that's available on our website and learn a little bit more about it if you're using the assets management system. So at its core, we're in this client. Let's say we've made our adjustments. We're done with that. We come back out. The system will ask us if we want to carry some of that information to the Schedule L. I'm just going to say no because I don't want it to mess up this IRS test return too much. Another great prompt that the system has is it'll kind of let me know right off the bat if something's not matching. So in this case, this was an old depreciation file. I didn't recall it from the prior year, so year-end update hadn't been run. And here's a warning saying, hey, you may need to go in and adjust some things. So some pretty cool stuff. We like it. In fact, side note, when we were testing some things, we had put the new depreciation on a couple of the preparers' computers. And one of the preparers was out of town and one of their clients called. And so I went and looked at that particular client. And as I recalled that client, it basically said, do you want to carry this information to the 4562 right in the 1040 program itself? So I called the other preparer and they're like, no, that person doesn't have any depreciation data. And I go, that's interesting because the system thinks that there is. Are you sure? So we went into it and sure enough, he had missed a rental. And so we needed to go to the client, get the rental information and fill that in. So it's kind of cool. I'm kind of excited about it. All right, one last thing to show you is just in other deductions. For the most part, straightforward. The only item that I wanted to point out is in this travels, meals, and entertainment. We kind of broke that out. So I'm going to change this to $1,000. And now when I exit that field, it's going to ask me if I want to split that between the M1 and the overall profit and loss on the deductions itself, which generally, you would want to split that. Hit enter and it automatically runs that split, switches our $1,000 to $500, and the other $500 is sitting over on the M1. All right. Okay, let's talk about some of the K and K1 input items. So like I had mentioned earlier, we've designed our Schedule K. You will see a lot of information on our K that isn't necessarily on the printed K. And that's because we want to allow for an allocation to take place between the K and the K1 and in a direct link fashion. So what that means is that even though a lot of these items are totaled up on the actual printed K, we still provide individual line items for every single code that could exist on the K1. So just kind of be aware of that. In general, anything that you see in gray, like our 199A item, is an amount that's going to carry forward automatically through to the K. Same with our other ordinary income and loss. That's going to carry from the front pages automatically to the K. Like our Schedule D transactions, obviously it's carrying from a Schedule D. So any items that you see in gray, they're there more for informational purposes, and you shouldn't have to play with them too much. But we do provide a couple overrides. One is for ordinary income and loss. So we're going to say, I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter. Now it turns it to red, indicating that that was overridden. If you want to get rid of the override, just simply back it all the way out, and now we see our original value there. But just know that there are overrides available. For the most part, I'll show you when we get to the K1, the information is going to allocate from the K to the K1s based on their profit or loss percentage. You can turn off allocation in the K1, and I'll show you where to do that. But one item that kind of is different is obviously guaranteed payments to partners. That may or may not apply to all the partners, and it probably won't apply to all the partners via their profit or loss percentage. So we default this value to not allocate the guaranteed payments to partners, knowing that that will probably be a direct entry on the individual K1 itself. Explanation lines, if you have generic explanation lines that you want to flow through to all the K1s, so you don't have to type that on each individual K1, you can enter it on the K, and then those will flow through automatically to the K1. It's kind of a, I don't know, a default explanation line, if that makes sense. All right, so to go into our K1 info, we'll access Jonathan Peak here. Basic information. Sorry, somebody chatted me something. Matt, no, that didn't show, so I think that's fine. Percentages, again, we ask that you key those in as decimal values versus percentage, whole numbers. Let's see. Again, this matches the IRS's code sheet. Not a whole bunch to talk about there. So this is that do not allow batch allocation checkbox that I was talking about. It's kind of fun. Every year we have to go through what's called an ATS process, which means we have to get a base set of tax returns approved by the IRS for electronic filing. And I don't think there's been a year yet that they've had their K1 dialed in. So almost verbatim, I have to turn off the don't allow batch allocation, key in the numbers so that they match what they have, and get it to basically match their answer sheet on the other side. Me and some of the other developers kind of make fun of them. Well, probably more than we should, but it's a fun thing to do. Anyway, so if you don't want to batch allocate to this partner for some reason, you can select this checkbox. If this is unchecked, then we'll go ahead and change something here. So let's remember our 735,000. Let's go back to our K. And we're going to override this to be something large. And now we're going to go back into our K1. And you'll see how that's automatically allocated to all of the partners, not just this one. We're going to turn that off. Okay, so questions. Not too much to go over. In the question section is where you would identify what type of entity partner this is. This does need to be filled out if you want your K1 information, in this case for a partnership, to allocate correctly to the analysis section. It needs to know what type of partner this is, so it knows, let's add this to an individual active, an individual passive on the analysis section. That's pretty straightforward. I did forget to mention that this year on the K1, they added a beginning column into the partner share of liabilities. So just be aware of that. In the past, it's just been one column. Your capital analysis, this will calculate automatically, but if you do have some manual adjustments, you would want to say don't allocate these below items, and then you can key in, whatever you want to key in the analysis section. If you are electing into a Schedule B2 audit regime, This is where that would be filled in, and you select what type it is, and then what its eligibility is. I don't actually want to do any of that, but that's where you would key in that elect to opt out of an audit regime information for that partner or shareholder. Okay. You know what, while I'm here, let me get rid of that override and put back my true value. Oh, just one more. So that the analysis, remember where I showed you in the K1, if I want those to flow through, you'll see that it then totals up and then knows where to put that analysis information. Again, once you have that keyed in, all that information is going to be recalled from the prior year, so it's a one and done type deal. But you do want to make sure that that's entered correctly to get to the analysis section that you want it to go to. Okay, let's go to the M1 and M2. I've got a couple items here to talk about. Yeah, so the M1 and the M2, about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, we changed the way that we calculate the M1. In an essence, like the slide is showing, I'm showing you the page 5 total from the K1 is really, or I'm sorry, the K is the starting point for line 9 of the M1. And it's in essence, we're calculating things backward to arrive at our net income per book, and we're adjusting items in between there per the K values. So we actually start with the K, that line 1 on the overall right above the net analysis. That goes into line 9 of the M1, and then basically it's flowed through backward to finally come up with line 1 of the M1 for our overall net income or loss per books. So I just like to show that. Some people, well, it kind of makes sense. Normally we come into a form and we start with line 1, and that calculates to the end of the line, whatever that might be. But because we're trying to determine what the net income is per books, and it's based on generally K values, that actually it calculates backward, or in essence, it starts with the K value and backs into the net income or loss per books. And we felt like that was a nice addition. It cleaned a lot of things up as far as mismatches between the M1 and the Schedule K. All right. So the Schedule L, it pretty much mirrors the form if you look at a Schedule L. We default the value to leave the beginning year column off, assuming that this was prior year recalled data. If this is a new client, then you would need to turn on this beginning year checkbox, or just use your mouse and key in the applicable values. But in essence, when you prior year recall, it's going to move your ending column to your beginning column and just be ready for the ending column adjustments. But again, if it's a new client or a new client to you, you will need to key in the beginning columns. All of these statements, just FYI, get electronically transmitted to the IRS. So do be aware of that and make sure you're keying in valid information on your descriptions. Show you the balance indicator. Go back into the program here. The program is going to require that you are in balance. Right now, everything is in balance, but if it's out of balance, it's going to let you know it's out of balance and where it's out of balance, so that you can kind of then go work with the client. I put it in to accounts payable. Well, that's not too bad, that could be off, but it's usually a cash in bank situation. At least that's what I found. When things aren't quite dialing in, go back to the client, say, we're out of balance. Oh, I forgot this or that or the other thing. Get things back in balance. We will warn you as you leave that you are out of balance, but then we'll go ahead and let you out. But then we do provide right on the main page so that you can see it, that you're out of balance. That's just a good reminder so that when you're coming back into the return, doing some other work, oh, I forgot to clear up that cash situation. Let me follow up with the client, get the information that I need to finish up this return. Let's go fix my balance sheet. Okay, let's see. I think we'll skip those and jump into okay, so let's talk about print a little bit. New clients get a little bit intimidated by this screen because they see all these check boxes and all these numbers of copies. But really, this screen is kind of divided into two sections. The top section with all those check boxes and the number of copies is really if you want to preview a specific form. If you are previewing the completed return or just printing the completed return, you really don't need to mess too much with this top section. This is, well, we'll show you. We'll bounce into the program. So here I've got this well, this is the partnership K1, but now we have an additional supplemental code sheet that I talked to you about earlier and it comes from the IRS K1 instructions. We made a couple modifications to add a column for the numbers, but that's what this checkbox is designating. Some of you may not want to provide it. It's kind of a long page. Let's go ahead and fire one off so you can kind of get a taste of what it is. So here's our K1. Here's our supplemental, just like last year, what you guys are used to. This year, well, let's back up to our K1 a little bit. So here we had room, so we designated the actual code. Here we had room, so we designated the actual codes. Here we did not have room, so we that's just totaled. And then over on our supplemental sheet, you have more additional information in addition to the standard K1 on the front page amount, because we didn't want to take that away from you. Having a code on a K1, just doesn't tell you much. Whereas, yeah, I've got a code, but now I've got real information that can help the preparer on the 1040 side figure out what to do with that information. But then when we scroll down, this is that new K1 code sheet. And like I said, this was in the 1065 K1 instructions. The only thing we did to it was add an amount and a column so that it'd just make a little bit more sense. The reason you may not want to print it is just it's a little bit long. For every partner, you've got, I don't know how many pages, 4 pages of additional code information. So it'll be up to you on your business rules on whether or not you want to include that. If you don't want to include that, simply uncheck the box and it'll just be our standard K1, page 1, and then our supplemental sheet with the codes with additional explanations. All right, let's see, we talked about that. Yeah, I think that's all. On the off the configuration, you can set that off the defaults and settings, but let's say you forgot to make a designation to your letter or whatnot. Right here in print, you can designate what letter you're using. The prepare selection is a little bit different than 1040. In 1040, you can default a default preparer. With the entities, a little bit lower usage. So the program just remembers what preparer you used last and use that as the default preparer. So I've got John Smith here, number 5. If I were to go into new return, or we call a prior year return, it's going to use John Smith number 5. Okay. And this is that, for whatever reason, if you don't want to load up the K1 database, I can't think of a valid reason why you wouldn't want to do that. But if you don't want to load up the K1 database when you're, again, printing the complete return, previewing the complete return, or electronically filing return, then you would make this selection here. Oh, I will point this out, and this is available in the 1040 system as well. On the 1040, if you go to form print, the selected form print, there's a new button called depreciation reports, and it's in the entity programs as well. This is so that if you don't have any asset changes and you didn't even go into that client for depreciation because it was already done, it's already included, but you do want to print an asset listing, or you do want to print a tax carry code listing, or what have you, you can actually access those reports by just clicking the button, and it'll skip all the other depreciation pages and take you specifically to the reports page, so that you can print that report and then come back to the main program cleanly. So that, yeah, that's a cool feature. It's in the 1040 system as well. And I think that is about all I want to talk about in print. Billing, it's pretty straightforward. The descriptions and the amounts, remarks, we have defaults for those in the defaults and settings. If you want to just provide some kind of generic invoice remarks, you can set those, and then it will carry those into the individual bills. In the entity programs, the billing is a lot more simplified than the 1040 system. You're pretty much going to enter a description and the amount, and it's just going to go on the bill. For the default, as far as the title for the bill, we default that to the prepare information, but you can change that title information if you want it to be something else by using option 16 off the billing, and you can key in different information other than the prepare. I think that's about it on billing. The state input, Matt kind of covered it. Mike covered it briefly as well. It follows the same flow as the 1040. Basically, you choose the state that you want off the main menu, and then you access the state. If you've already accessed the state, this menu will pop up, and it's basically asking you, do you want to carry the Fed information to this state again? Do you want to do nothing? We've already made some state adjustments. This is more common on an entity state than some of the 1040 states, where you'd almost always want that information to flow through. But if you've done entity work on a state and you don't want things to accidentally come back over, then you would select that option D, don't carry. And then if you basically just want to start over on the state, you select that 0 option. It's going to basically wipe out everything that you had on the state, recarry the Fed data to the state, and then start as if the state was brand new. The preview on the state returns, for the most part, because they're native, You can access you can select individual forms on the print from the Fed. I don't have a state here, darn it. Who do I have? Who is done right now? I think Alabama might be done. Yes, very good. So on that other main page, now that I'm in a state, you could select Alabama. It would bring up its individual forms, and you could print those. Or if I'm printing the complete return, the Alabama portion will be included in the complete return. But if you want to see what the state's looking like, on each one of the states, this preview return is going to show just that state's information instead of the entire, Fed as well. So just kind of know that that option is there. And they work, I'm showing Alabama, but they work pretty much universal across all of our states, except for some of the few remaining corps that are still legacy to where you have to print separately. All right, let's talk about electronic filing. Okay, so this is the electronic filing page. And we're gonna go in and validate and actually transmit a return here just in a minute to show you how to do that. But just in broad overview, I wanted to touch on a couple things that are significantly different than the 1040 system. The ERO selection works very similar as the paid preparer selection on the print, in that the system's going to remember whichever ERO you used last and treat that as your default ERO. So if you haven't selected one yet, you will select your ERO, and then it will remember that ERO. From there, you will want to access your officer PIN. This page is where you this is your signature section for that officer that's authorizing you to electronically file this return. The IRS wants to know who authorized it. New this year is this SSN or TIN of the signing officer. So you'll need to enter that. You'll also need to enter the taxpayer PIN, which is just a 5-digit number, and that represents the officer's signature versus a wet signature. And then also new this year is this prior year income amount. And this is in all of the entities. If it's prior year data, the program will look at last year's data and it will bring that in automatically. If this is a new client to you, then you'll need to do a little bit of homework and find out what their prior year income was. The IRS is using all that information to kind of cross-reference that and basically authenticate that this return is being filed by who they think it should be being filed. It's almost like a little bit of an identity theft type indication. Excuse me. Grab a little bit of water there. If that's not entered for this year, the IRS is not going to reject it, but they will, on your acknowledgement, you'll see an alert. And basically it just means the alert says that the processing of this return is going to be delayed. I don't really know how delayed that is as it's new, but I just want to point that out to you, that is information that you should probably be trying to get from all of your clients. The last thing I want to talk about is 8879 versus 8453. The entities, in my opinion, handle the 8453 a little bit better than the individuals, the 1040 side. In that on the 1040, if you have an 8453 and you are sending it in with some sort of disclosure or supporting documentation, that really has to be snail mailed. With the entities, you basically, I'll show you when we get into it here in a second. If 8453 is selected, you actually, it creates a PDF, you get that signature, and you can attach it to the e-file record, and you can attach your disclosures or whatever to the e-file record as well. The signature method gets designated in the e-file record as an 8453, and it basically alerts the IRS that there's a little bit more to this than just the boilerplate partnership return or what have you return. So yeah, the entities kind of handle, I like the way that they handle the 8453, but there is one additional step to that, in that you actually have to do the attachment, otherwise it won't even validate. If your 8453 isn't part of the e-file record, then it's going to reject. Okay. All right, so actually let's go ahead and jump into the return now. Let me go to my e-file section. And here's our officer pin. And I'm pretty sure this was an 8879, but we're going to tell it it's an 8453 just to kind of show you that. I don't have the 8453, but doesn't matter. It doesn't know. Then we're going to come out and we are going to add an attachment. And the first thing it says, because my signature method was 8453, is this the attachment for the 8453? And we're going to say yes. And let's see, where would I have a PDF? I've got the PDF here. Here's our PDF. So we finished linking that. Now that I'm done with that, I can go ahead and add some of the disclosures and some of the other information. So now I'm going to say, nope, this isn't. Whatever. Go find another PDF. And whatever, it doesn't matter. So pretend that was a disclosure statement. Now, both the 8453, which you would have gotten signed, scanned back in and on your computer, and the disclosure documentation is part of this return and will get e-filed to the IRS. Mike made a note of it yesterday, but do be careful. If you have that information on like a USB stick, the program is merely linking to where that file is up until you go to transmit. So if you have a USB stick and you said, yeah, it's on the F drive or whatever, and then you pull that out, the program's not going to be able to find that file. So just kind of be aware that you need to keep that link linked until you actually transmit the return. Okay, validation works. It's identical to the 1040. The system will go through, look at the actual schema record, and let you know that there is a validation error in what it is. And Matt kind of talked about some of those values. Talked about how to read some of that information. Here's our 8453 that it's complaining about, and here's our disclosure statement. So that's how those attachments get sent. Looks like I already had one for that, and that's probably why it's complaining. So that's kind of the validation in terms of it looking at the schema. And like Matt said, that's a big word. You guys don't need to fully understand that or worry about it, but it is nice to have a base understanding of there's a problem with this return, and we highlight where the problem is in validation with a highlighted yellow so that you can start to troubleshoot and figure out what's going on with this return. The other thing that we do, and this is the same in 1040 as well, is we do some internal validation. So let's say I forgot to key in my zip code. When we go to validate, now instead of a green checkbox that our internal system thinks that it's probably okay to send. Now we have a red X, and our system is saying there's something wrong even before we get to validation, that there's something wrong with this return. And so our internal validation is just reporting that a valid zip code wasn't entered. It could have been on the K1, it would give us some more information, but in this case, it was basic information. In addition to that, we have our original problem, but now we're failing valid schema validation, and it tells us pretty much exactly where the zip code in the namespace of the return header filer US address isn't there. So now we can pop over to our XML, and it'll kind of tell us, hey, about here, there's a problem with this return. So easy enough. We're going to go back in and put in our zip code and go back into eFile and validate. We still have my binary attachment error, but now you'll see our internal validation error of our zip code has gone away. Okay, now that I have thoroughly messed up this return, I'll tell you what, we'll fix it real quick. Okay, we're good to go now. Okay, so we're pretty much done validating. This is a test return, so I'm going to go ahead and retransmit it. It's already been accepted. If I were to leave this accepted, nothing would happen because we've already sent it. We're going to go ahead and transmit that return. One main difference in the entities, oh, I forgot to put in my client ID. We're not going to transmit this return. One of the main difference in the entities is that we don't batch process electronic filing. The entities, you're kind of working with an entity or a return, you're going to go ahead and electronically file that one return when you're pretty much finished with it. Which is the way I think most people are doing it, even on the 1040 side, but on the 1040 side, we do have a batch transmit option off the electronic filing menu as well. So pretend that went through. We're done with our electronic filing record. We have the same status as the 1040 system. Mike's already covered that, so I'm not going to jump into it, but it is important to track your records, track your rejects, get everything cleaned up. It was a little bit of a surprise. We did receive a tech call, I think 2 years ago, and they hadn't been tracking a thing and just assumed that, I don't know, red was good, and we had to do a bunch of work to try to get them caught up. So it is important, make sure you do your due diligence, get things accepted and sent off properly. Let's see, I think that reprinting ACTs works the same as the 1040. If you need to reprint an ACT, you select that record and then click the button. Question came up, why would you need to keep your accepted ACTs yesterday? And that is because that's kind of your receipt. That's your receipt if the IRS comes back or the client says, hey, did that actually get sent? Not only that, it's also a receipt that you should be having in your overall ERO records that you can produce. You either have or can produce your ACT files. I think that is about it. This is the page that I usually end up getting my ACTs on. You can get ACTs back on the main eFile page as well. I don't know. I'm a creature of habit. I usually get them here and like to see it turn green for some reason. Let's see. We didn't talk about it too much. I'm kind of at the end of this presentation, but I will briefly mention breadcrumb navigation just as a aid to speed up some of your data processing. This works the same way as in the 1040 system. So up at the top, we'll go into, we'll get pretty nested here. We will go to other deductions. So up at the top, you'll see I went from the main menu to the deductions to other deductions. So this is nice. If I'm just waiting for one number to come from a client that I'm missing and everything else is done, I can go in and key in that one number, and then instead of having to go in that far and then back out that far, which is 1, 2, well, in this case, it's just 3 pages, now you can bounce around a little bit. So we'll go back in where we were, and let's say I've keyed in that number, I'm done, and I'm done. Now I can click main menu and skip all those other pages. So just kind of wanted to let you know that. The other thing I'll point out is the version date up at the top. Anytime you call for tech support and you say, I've got a problem with X, Y, or Z, the first words out of the tech's mouth are going to be what version are you on? Because they want to make sure it's not a problem that we've already fixed. So this is where you're going to find the version date and the version number. And that's the same on the 1040 as well. All right, let me check one other thing. Matt, do you know if you could, I don't see your message coming through. Do you know if that message got populated like I was hoping on the 1040?
Which message?
The program availability.
Not sure I know.
Do me a favor real quick and chat Dave. He was supposed to chat you and let you know if the program was ready for download.
Oh yeah, I messaged you there. I don't know if you saw it. It looks like they're taking a little more time on it.
Oh, are they? Okay. Well, I was hoping to have good news for you in that as soon as this session was over, you could go download the Master Tax Menu Depreciation in 1040. Rest assured that it's very close. I'm pretty confident that we will have it uploaded sometime today. We will also send out an email notification letting you know that it's available. So look for that notification or just check back with our website. The 1040 system, knock on wood, should be available for downloading today sometime off of our website. So that's good news. Should have that before Christmas. Just be aware that it is the first release, so you will come across some pages that say if this form not released yet, it's because it's not released yet. We don't have it into the program. But if you do come across any other, real bugs, please let our techs know so that we can get those dialed in. Or we have been testing it for the last week, and it looks like it's in pretty good shape. So we're excited to announce that. Just need a little bit more time, and we'll follow up with that. With that, that's the end of my presentation. Matt, did we get most of the questions answered?
Yeah, I think we got all of the question answered.
All right, perfect. Thank you again for choosing Taxware. We have our next session is our business builder, and that'll start at 11 a.m. If you haven't signed up for that, you can do so on our website. And that is it. Let's go ahead and close this session.